Welcome back everyone. For today's video, we are once again going to be returning to our classic educational speedrun series. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action as we start a 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with a bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Night on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey, hey, he's smurfing play-by-play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
Okay, so in the first game we got the white pieces. I'm going to play the move d4. I think for today's video I'm going to focus a lot on playing the classic London system. So we get d4 d5. Now you could play knight f3 first, but I'm going to go for the standard bishop f4 right away, followed by the move e3. Now I don't know if my opponent knows this opening very well or not, so I can't always guarantee we'll get a main topical line, but I really do like this general setup from the basic standpoint that you get very easy development. You bring the bishop out, you put it on the diagonal, you open up this other diagonal for the bishop, and you have very easy development. Now this has been a common theme that I've spoken about quite a bit. I'm going to develop my knight here. I could move the bishop first. Order is kind of interchangeable. I would say that what I am saying right now depends on the level you're at. If you are a pure beginner, I think the main thing is to focus on the setup, bringing the knight bishop out. Order doesn't matter whatsoever. If you're more an intermediate player, understanding the order of putting a bishop on d3 or knight on f3 comes into play a little bit more, but it really depends on the level you're at. I would say there's one other very important point when you play London system, which is that if black plays c5 and trades a pawn, you need to know which way to capture down the road. But again, as with most of the games we play in this series, I will do a light bit of analysis after the game ends. So now I'm going to play the move bishop to d3 here, developing the bishop so I can castle a king, bishop on a great diagonal as well. Both of the bishops are optimally placed. So now we get the move h6. Now one of the things that I should be careful about here is this dark square bishop. One of the common themes when you play the London system is your opponent wants to move the knight to capture the bishop. If my opponent had played the move knight here right away, I would be able to move the bishop to g5. So when my opponent plays h6, he wants to play knight h5 where I can't move the bishop. Now the weird thing is this position's a little bit unusual from the standpoint that playing for h1 and bishop h2 probably isn't objectively the best way to play it, but the important thing here is this is for people who are beginners, so maybe lower intermediate level as opposed to say a master or grandmaster level. So the move that I'm going to play here is h3 anyway, so on knight to h5 I can't highlight, I will drop the bishop back to h2. We get a6, and now I'm going to move my knight here. I can always castle, of course. The order I would say is not super relevant. If you are a master level player or better and you're watching this video, of course there is a very specific reason I didn't castle, but for the people who are beginners, you just simply want to focus on the development. So we got b5. Now I'm going to go c3, reinforcing the center pawn here on d4. Very important pawn. We get the move b4, and now I'm just going to castle. If my opponent trades the pawns, I just take back. I'm not really worried structurally about this position that much, so we get the move a5. Now at this point I've completed my development, and this is probably the most difficult thing in the game of chess is once you've completed your basic plan of development, how do you come up with plans in the middle game? Now what we will notice about this position here is that my opponent has 1 2 3 4 5 6 pieces on their original squares that have not been developed. Generally when that is the case, you want to try and open up some diagonals, some files, play very quickly because your opponent is way behind. Now if for example my opponent's bishop were on e7, it would be very hard to take advantage because my opponent could castle in one go, but my opponent still needs to move the bishop before he can castle. So I'm going to play this move e4 now. The reason I'm going to play this is that my central pawns are very well guarded here, but I'm trying to open up a file, trying to open up a diagonal and take advantage of this lack of development. So now we get the move bishop to a6. Now this is actually a very good move by my opponent. It tries to eliminate this bishop on the diagonal. It also develops one of the pieces that was at home prior to this move. So this is a move that I really like here. Now I'm going to trade the bishops. Normally when you play the London system, you generally want to try and avoid it, but one of the tricks in chess is that every position is a little bit different, and in this case this isn't a standard variation. So here I do actually trade the bishops because I'm trying to take advantage of this lack of development here. My opponent should take with the rook. That's what I expect on the next turn. Now I'm going to go queen to e2, hitting the rook on the diagonal, also maybe creating some threats on this e file as well. So now we get to move rook to a8. Now my opponent here is trying to finish their development. This bishop and king need to get out. I don't have a good way to take advantage of the center being closed, but nonetheless, I'm going to try to force something here. I'm going to go knight to e5. If my opponent trades, I can take with the pawn or the bishop. I don't actually know which one to take with. I think I'm going to take with the pawn here, and the reason is that even though temporarily I have these pawns stacked on top of each other here, if my opponent moves knight, I can always get rid of the double pawns here. For example, I can just take. And now after my opponent takes the pawn, I'm going to play this move e6 here, and my opponent is still lagging behind in development. You have all these pieces on their original squares, and this is looking very, very good. Now, if you aren't following what I'm saying, as I've mentioned before, I will obviously do a sort of a light recap or analysis after this game ends, like I've been doing in a lot of our recent videos here as part of the speedrun series. So do not fret if you missed something that I said. So my opponent goes bishop c5. Now I'm actually very impressed by this move. It's not necessarily a great move or anything, but had my opponent taken the pawn after e6, I'd probably be well on my way to a victory. Instead we get bishop c5. I'm just going to take. Now I should be up a pawn. I have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. My opponent has 1 2 3 4 5 6. So I have one extra pawn here, and now I'm going to play the move queen to h5, stopping my opponent from castling the king out of the center of the board. Get king f8. Now I'm going to go rook d1 here with the idea of using this completely open d file here. I'm probably going to move the knight to e4 f3, and with this great rook on d1, this king being unable to castle, which then means this rook on h8 is very bad here, I should be well on my way to a relatively smooth victory. Now, if I were playing from the black side here, you're obviously in a lot of trouble, and a lot of compliments go to my opponent, because what my opponent realizes here is that with the king being uncastled and all these pieces on the back rank, you want to try and trade off the heavy material. Now, there's nothing wrong with trading the queens here because I have one extra pawn, but because this king can't castle, meaning that this rook can't get into the game either here, I really would prefer not to castle, or not castle, but rather I prefer not to trade the queens. So I'm going to go for the move queen to f3, setting up some threats on this f file, hitting the rook on a8. Of course, this also creates the classic 90-degree right triangle as well, but that's simply a byproduct of the threats that I have here. So we get the move bishop to b6. Now this move is not necessarily the best move. It's not a terrible move either. I could take a pawn and my opponent moves the king, but in this position, does a second pawn really do a whole lot for me is a big question. I don't think that after takes king g8, I can move the bishop back and have two pawns advantage, but I feel like I can probably do better here because my opponent still doesn't have development. And if I take this pawn, I get one extra pawn, but I'm still not able, or not, sorry, my opponent then probably has easier development. This is something I'm going to show after the game. Of course, it's a little bit hard to explain with just arrows. So I'm not going to take a second pawn here. I'm going to try to bring my knight to the center of the board, open up this file for the rook here, and I'm really trying to attack very quickly, because while I could get that second pawn, it isn't likely to really change a whole lot here. By going knight to e4, knight c4 also is probably a pretty reasonable move, but with the knight in the center and this open file here, I really want to put pressure before my opponent can develop the king and the rooks and the queen. So we got the move g5. Now this is a very bad move here, because in the previous position, if I had taken h6 and the king moves, the king still would have had some protection with the pawn in front. But now after g5, I take with check, and this king suddenly is in all kinds of trouble, primarily because there's no pawn here to cover the f6 square. So now I should win this game very, very soon. So my opponent goes queen to f7. Now I don't mind trading, because once I trade the queens, I take this rook or take this knight and I check the king, and now I'm up a piece in an endgame. Before I would have been up one pawn, but generally if you're up by one piece or more, going into it by piece I mean a knight or a bishop, generally you are happy to make such trades unless your opponent has some kind of pawn, some like pass pawn or multiple pass pawns on one side of the board. If you're going to be ahead by a knight or more, generally you don't mind these even exchanges into end games. I'll just drop the bishop back so it doesn't get captured. I'm again happy to trade the bishops here. It will of course double my pawns, but because I have this extra knight, the extra material should be simply too much for my opponent to deal with. So we got bishop a7. I don't mind. I'm going to follow my plan, just trade the bishops. And now how do I try to convert the position? I think I'm going to go f4 here. This sort of is a move that protects the pawn, but more than protecting the pawn here, it simply is a move that creates space so I can start pushing my pieces up the board. If I want to be really fancy, g4 might lead to some kind of funny checkmate, but I think I'm just going to play simple chess here. Let's go knight to g3, checking the king. King is going to go back, and I'm going to go f5, just forcing open files here for the rook and the knight, the rooks and the knight. I'll take with the knight here. Now I'm threatening rook g7 with g4 checkmate. This king on g6 is pretty much stuck here. You've got a passive rook not in the game. I can even push the pawns, but after a4, the cleanest way to win here is to go check, king h5, and now I have g4, which is checkmate here. The king simply has no squares available. Both squares, the king gets captured by the rook. The king can't take, king can't jump up either, so all the squares here are covered. The king has no escape. So let's take a look at this game. I will now let me put this on. Let's go back here. Okay, so there are a couple important things about the London system to start with. First thing is the general setup is you want to bring the bishop out, put the pawn here, and then bring the knight, bring the bishop, and simply play the move h3, followed by, let's just say, castles. This is the general setup. You could interpose the order, you could interchange the order with like knight bd2 and then castles, but generally you want to bring the knights out, bring the bishops out, make sure that you play h3 so there's no knight h5 and castle king. If you get this setup with the knights, the bishops, and the king castled here, this is when you reach the middle game, and this is the dream standard setup that you wish to achieve from the get-go with this opening. Now in chess, every variation is different. So for example, when what I was trying to say earlier about beginner levels, if you're a complete beginner, that should be your only focus here, is to make sure there are really I would say are a couple important things to understand as a beginner. First thing is you don't want to blunder something really ridiculous, like for example you got some position like this where you run into an e5 idea with e4 to fork the bishop and the knight. This is not, you need to be aware of this if you're a complete beginner. This is one thing you need to be aware of. Additionally, the other main trick that you need to be aware of is, for example, if you get a position like this, at some point, if your opponent has an idea like knight to h5 here, eliminating this really nice bishop on the diagonal, because if you go back, I trade the knight for the bishop. You go forward, I take. If you go forward, I can also just take here. These positions aren't necessarily bad for white per se, but at the beginner level, it's more about understanding the plan and the idea than like specific lines. Like for example, you'll notice here, I think that after bishop to e5 in this position, and I realize my board has been off for much of this, so I apologize, you guys. My apologies. I realize my board has been off. That is really disappointing, guys. So let me make this a little bit bigger. I apologize. That is very sad. Okay, sorry, you guys. So in the comments, you guys are gonna be like, wow, Hikaru, he started this video, he didn't even look closely at the board before doing this video. At any rate, you guys, the point about these lines, I think fortunately you guys probably saw most of the board. I might have my team go back and edit little bits of this, but the main thing is you want to be aware that you don't lose this light dark square bishop. So you don't want to lose dark square bishop, and then you want to focus on development. Now back to the game. In this game, my opponent did not put pressure on the pawn. One of the main themes in London is that you really need to be careful about the central pawn exchange. So you sometimes need to go c3 in this game, because my opponent put the knight on c6. There's never going to be any central pressure on the pawn, so I am free to develop the pieces. So we go here, bishop d3, and now I play h3 not necessary, but again, since it's for beginners, I want you guys to be really aware of this idea. So there's no way for your opponent to win this dark square bishop. You keep it on the diagonal. Now if you're a more intermediate player here, probably what you should play something like knight d2 or c3, because the actual exchange of the knight for the bishop isn't going to be great, but that's much more intermediate to advanced level, and I wouldn't really worry about it. So I go h3, we got this position, b5, I play c3, we got b4, castles, a5, and now I play the move e4, trying to open up the center of the board because my opponent is behind. Now we get the trade, queen e2, I play the move knight to e5 here, trying to trade the knights, and now my opponent plays the move knight takes e5. Now you're probably wondering, why did I take with the pawn and not the bishop? The primary reason I took with the pawn and not the bishop is that, let's just say, for example, if I make a couple more moves, let's just say we get some position like this. If I take with the pawn here, after knight takes pawn, takes, and a move like queen d5, this is simply even material here. After takes, rook d1 and rook d8 should be a draw, not a whole lot going on. Now the big difference between this position and the position in the game is that when we get to this position, back in the game here after takes, my opponent has not developed. So when I take with a pawn here, if my opponent were to play the logical knight takes pawn, I can take and play the move rook to d1 here, claiming this open file while targeting this queen on the back rank. And after my opponent moves the queen, let's just say to e7, after queen to b5 check, suddenly the king is completely stuck, and it leads to a checkmate after c6, queen takes pawn, queen d7, and queen takes queen, and that's game over. So after takes and rook d1, my opponent would have to go queen c8. After queen takes e4, again I threaten this check. Let's just say you get rook a6, and now I can play rook to d3 here, bishop e7, rook d1, and after castles I can play this move rook to g3, and there's all kinds of pressure on the king side here, and black is in a lot of trouble. Now this would not be possible if my opponent had followed the regular development, but because my opponent did not follow the regular development, that's why I was able to take with the pawn on e5. So we got knight e7, I took, and now we got to move bishop c5. What my opponent could have taken the pawn here, but this would have actually led to a quicker victory, because after e6 here, takes, let's say queen e7, I can go queen c6 here, attacking the rook. I have huge threats with rook to e1 here. The pawn on d5 is also hanging, and again, there's no development here for my opponent, so because there's no development, your position collapses immediately. Now this is why when you get a big advantage in development, you've castled, sometimes you really want to push hard to open up the center of the board the way that I did here, and that's actually why I thought bishop c5 was a better move, because it didn't lose the game immediately. Now unfortunately for my opponent, I have queen h5 check. Otherwise, let's just say I go knight e4, bishop b6, say rook d1 and castles. White is still much better here, but at least black is going to get to finish the development, and it's only one pawn, and the game goes on. So I throw the check. Now black loses development, rook d1, queen e8. I could have traded here, of course, but after here and bishop e7, even though white is up one pawn here in the center of the board, the game goes on. It's an end game. I don't think that at a beginner level or even intermediate level, this is going to be a guaranteed win. So I keep the queens on the board here. We get bishop b6, and now I play the move knight e4. Now I could have taken this pawn on h6. This would have been a second pawn, and after king g8, bishop f4, white is better, but after say I was going to say queen e7, I guess black can't do that, but say black were able to get this position with rook f8, white is still winning here, but you'll notice that there is a little bit of pressure on the diagonal and the f file, and there's also an open h file for the rook. Now this is still completely winning for white, but it's a situation where why do you want to help your opponent finish their development solely for one pawn? So that's why I played knight to e4 here, because again, I want to keep my opponent's pieces passive. I want to put pressure on the file, all kinds of threats still by moving the bishop. And now we get the fatal error with g5, where I can take, I play trade, rook d7, and here I have one extra knight. As I was saying, generally, if you're up a minor piece, a knight or a bishop, that is a reasonable situation where you should be willing to make exchanges of rooks or queens off the board, the even trades. The only time that I'd be very careful about that is that, here you'll notice there are no passed pawns. But say, for example, we got some position like, how do I do this? I'm trying to figure out a way to do this. Say you were to get some position like this, for example. This position is still probably winning for white, but black has some passed pawns or rook a1 ideas. It could become a little bit scary. Or, for example, say you got some position like this, where black has passed pawns. Sure, you have an extra knight on the board, but there are some tricks here in the position. But in this situation, there are no tricks here because I have pawns on the files. There are no passed pawns for black. So now I'm more than happy to do the even trades, and then we eventually get the classic checkmate. All right, so let's move on to the next game. Here we go. The board should be perfect this time, unlike the previous game. Even though I think the little bits were cropped at the edges, it still should be pretty good. Get the move d4. Now I'm going to play the move knight to f6 here. We get bishop f4, and my opponent plays a London system against me. So I'm going to play d5. My next move is going to be c5. This is actually really ironic. We're going to play c5 and knight c6 and try to punish right away. Let's go knight c6. Try to put massive pressure on the central pawn immediately. I expect knight to f3 or c3 here. Let's see what my opponent does. Okay, we get c3. Logical move. I'm going to develop my knight. If white ever takes, I have e5 here. So we get knight f3. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play something to sort of upset the balance a little bit. I'm going to play this move bishop to f5. Now, this move is a little bit dubious, but I'm going to play this for a very, very specific reason, which is that my opponent's going to follow through with the standard development of knight d2, but after e6, you'll suddenly notice this bishop, it cannot go to this d3 square. My bishop covers a square, so even though white is following the general themes, bringing the knight, the bishop, the knight, and the knights out, white can't finish the standard development with bishop d3. So we get h3. Now I'm going to play h6 because now that I put my bishop on this diagonal, just like this bishop, I want to have the retreating square available after either knight h4 or the g4 move. So now we got the move a3. Now my opponent here, you'll notice, is being a little bit slow in developing. Now I think the reason for that is that the logical move bishop to d3 is not available, and if you don't understand the themes deeper than just the standard setup, sometimes you're going to get confused, because when you don't have this bishop d3 move here, it's like, wait, but I can't develop the bishop, I can't castle. And that's why my opponent lashed out with h3 and g4, because the standard idea that's been hammered home time and time again was unavailable, and now my opponent doesn't know what to do. Now it's very important as you gradually improve from the beginner level more towards intermediate, because as you become better, this is why you need to be more aware of more pawn structures, understand the plans more, because sometimes you're not always going to get what you want. And that's true, that's as true in life as it is in chess. So we get queen b3. I'm going to castle here. I don't mind castling, because if white takes, I'll go rook b8. And you see my opponent very quickly is making some serious errors. I'm going to play rook b8 very quickly. There's pressure on the pawn. We're going to get queen to a6, I assume here. The only move. Now, if I were to play rook b2, my opponent would have this move bishop b5 to create this very, very nasty pin. So I'm going to kick the queen again away from the square, and then I'm going to take the pawn so that the queen is no longer spying the knight and the queen on this file, or laterally, I should say. So we got queen a4. Now I take the pawn, because if my opponent moves the bishop, there's no queen to attack the knight and the queen here. So because I kicked the queen, now I'm free to move the knight without hanging this queen on d6. We got bishop b5. I'm going to move my knight very calmly. I don't want to hang the knight here. Now my opponent has some issues, because if my opponent castles here, you'll notice that white has pushed these pawns on the king side. It's created some weaknesses here. It's very unlikely you can castle queenside. This is just a big boo-boo. The diagonal is open. I just take the rook with a bishop, and this probably is going to be a very, very quick game. I think my opponent might even just resign here, actually. Okay, my opponent castles. I'll just move the bishop back. Doesn't really matter here, because I'm ahead by a total rook here. So now it's just a matter of finishing up the game. I don't mind even trades. I'm probably going to look to do something over here very quickly on the king side, since my opponent has pushed these pawns in front of the king. I think I'll just pre-move knight takes bishop. No reason not to. We get knight e5. That's actually a good move. Or no, it's not a good move. That just hangs the knight. What am I talking about? I thought it was a good move, but it did just actually hang this knight on d2. And this position just falling apart very, very quickly for my opponent. Now I think we'll get a resignation, probably. So we get queen takes a7. I'm just going to play knight g6, try to trade off the knight. At this point, very similar to the previous game, it's not about being flashy in order to win. It's about following the fundamentals of offering these even trades here, because the more of these pieces that come off the board, the less threats my opponent can generate with the limited material. Again, with only a queen here, there are no real threats. I guard the pawn with my rook. So with the queen, the bishop, the knight, and the rook, if I can just get rid of this knight, it's the only really dangerous piece here near my king. So I'm more than happy to exchange it. Of course, I have the extra rook and the extra knight here, which doesn't hurt. Now here, I would ordinarily take with the f pawn, but one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to confuse those of you guys who are beginners watching the video, because when I show the exceptions to the rule, I would say 95% of the time, at least in the beginner games, those of you who are watching, assuming you're a beginner, these rules are not going to, the rules are going to be more important than the exceptions. So I'm going to take with the bishop. I don't want to capture with the pawn to create these double pawns and capture away from the center. Now this of course is the toughest thing in chess. As you get better, you begin to realize the rules and where you can break them completely. But for the beginners who are watching this video, it's much more important that you understand the general themes and how they're going to be, how like 95% of the time, following the general theme is much more important than trying to find the exception in a position, because it's just not going to be applicable at that level. So I'm going to go bishop d3 here. I'm going to force more trades of pieces off the board here. Just eliminate the pieces my opponent has. I will take with the rook here. This is all about getting rid of pieces here. It's all about eliminating pieces. Now we get c4. My opponent is attacking my rook, but it doesn't matter. I take. It's still an even trade. I don't really mind the even trades here because I have so much more material on the board. Probably get queen takes rook, I assume. Or pawn takes pawn, perhaps. So my opponent takes this bishop. My opponent doesn't see the rooks hanging. I'll move the knight, guard the rook, and I hit the pawn at the same time. Next idea is to go queen h2 and go for the very, very quick checkmate here. Okay, so my opponent takes. I think I'll just go queen h2 right away to set up the multiple mating threats. I think the only way to stop checkmate is to sack the queen for the rook. Okay, so my opponent does actually sack the queen for the rook. My opponent does see it. That's actually very impressive spotting, because it's the only way to stop the checkmate. Had I known my opponent was going to sack the queen, I probably would have just taken the pawn and gone for something a little bit quicker. But you know, this is what it is. I'll take the pawn with check. Just go check, capture the bishop on b5 here. Now my opponent has nothing left but pawns on the board, so I'm very happy. My opponent can't really do a whole lot with only pawns. No real threats, as long as I don't allow a pawn to get through. I'll just play rook b8. I can obviously capture next turn. Queen c4 is probably slightly quicker in terms of creating the checkmate, but it doesn't really matter because I'm going to win anyway. Let's go check, and this should be checkmate, I think. Yeah, this is just checkmate. The king has no squares. e2 covered by the queen, c2 covered by the queen, and d2 covered by the knight. So that's checkmate. All right, so back to this game, as we always do, as we take a brief look at this game. One thing I did that was different was I played this bishop f5 move. Now, this is objectively not the best move. Probably I should have played bishop g4 here if I was going to develop the bishop. But the thing that happened here is once I go e6, as I mentioned before, white wants to go for standard development. You want this bishop on d3, but now you can't put the bishop on d3. So already for my opponent, it's an uh-oh moment. What am I supposed to do here? So we get h3, h6, and now my opponent plays g4, and this is simply a terrible move. And this is why it's very tricky when you play systems like the London. You have to know more than just the basic setup if you're playing at like an intermediate level, because sometimes you're not always going to get what you want. Now, you're probably thinking that's contradictory to what I said earlier at the beginner level. At the beginner level, nobody's going to play bishop f5 in the first place, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Although now that we have the speedrun video, maybe someone will watch it and play it. To point out why this move actually is not played that frequently, it's because here white can take the pawn on c5. Now, I believe that against the other move order, which is knight f3, knight 6, knight bd2, I believe that bishop f5 is actually a decent move in this position. It's completely acceptable. But when white plays with the move c3, the reason that this is different is after white takes, now the pawn on c3 supports b4, so I go e6, white can go b4, and the pawns all guard each other. So had this happened in the game, what I would have done is I would have played I think I would have played the move knight to e4, and white goes b4, and I would have played, I think there's a crazy line with g5 and bishop g7. There's something very unclear here. Computer says takes, and bishop g7, and this is for the people who are at master level or better, but apparently black is very much in the game. These great diagonals, the pawns are very weak here on c3 and b4 specifically, so it's very much a game where anything can happen. But back to the game, we get this position, g4, already a mistake. Probably white should play bishop to e2 or bishop to b5 here, but we get g4. I go back, a3, bishop d6, and this is already a point where my opponent doesn't know what to do because they can't follow this general plan that they've been told in various videos or whatever books they've studied. So we get takes, I castle. Again, my opponent is behind in development, and my opponent has wasted time pushing these pawns on the king side, so it's already very bad. Takes kind of is just the end of it. One point I want to make is if I were to take here after bishop b5, black is so much better here apparently, but there's a big problem. So I move the knight, I lose the queen. So that's why I kick this queen first. The pawn guards, so takes, you would lose the queen. If you take, you lose the queen. Queen a4 takes, bishop b5, and now there's no queen here to hit the knight and the queen, so I can move my knight without losing the queen. And at this point, it's already very bad. Rook b1 just ends it, but it's already very hard to play. So let's do one more game. Here we go, one more game. We'll play the London from the white side. So this seems to be a London themed video. Let's go bishop f4 here, knight c6, and now I play e3. Now again, my opponent has not played c5 to pressure this pawn on d4, so because my opponent hasn't played it, it's an interesting situation where do I really want to go c3 or not. Now it's funny because my opponent plays bishop f5 here, which does stop me from putting the bishop on d3. So I'm gonna go knight f3. This is actually kind of ironic. We get he's gonna go for knight b4. Okay, so my opponent's going for the big cheese, trying to win the game immediately. I'm gonna go knight a3 to guard this pawn from being captured, and then I'm gonna play c3. Now what I was starting to say is it's kind of ironic because in this position my opponent did put the bishop on f5, so I don't get the standard development right after I just spoke about how hard it is to do that. Now the funny thing is here, my opponent actually is in trouble because now I'm pressuring this pawn, and the knight can't go to a6 to guard. Like, remember, my knight went to guard this pawn, but now suddenly this knight on c6 can't go to a6 and guard this pawn here. get bishop d6. Now I'm very happy. I'll take. I have the 2 bishops. Also a permanent spying of this pawn on d6. Let's go queen b3. A lot of pressure here very quickly. Generally, if your opponent plays a bishop f5 to stop bishop d3, it's worth pointing out that more often than not, you're either going to go queen to b3 or bishop to b5. We go queen a3. More pressure on this weak pawn on d6 here, and my opponent is already in all kinds of trouble. So we get knight to f6. Now I'm more than happy to grab this pawn. More importantly, on top of being up 1 pawn here, this bishop stops the black king from castling, so my opponent is probably going to struggle with development. So here I have to figure out what do I want to do. Now I think what I'm going to play here is I want to think about my development and how to finish it. I'm going to go bishop b5 because I can still castle now, but I also pin the knight on c6. Now I do like knight e4. That's a good move. I think I'm going to go bishop b4. I want to keep this pressure alive so the king cannot castle while spying both these diagonals. Okay, so we get the move a6. So now I'm going to trade the bishop for the knight. I don't really mind because I'm up a pawn here. I guess let's just castle. Why not? Finish the development. Now I am up 1 pawn here, but I do have a slight issue, which is that in this position, my opponent has a very good knight that I can't easily kick away. It's covering some critical squares, but also the position is kind of close. So even though I have this extra c pawn, I can't really open up files easily. Although my opponent just blunders a pawn with a5. My queen guards the bishop. I don't really understand what that move was. I think my opponent just blundered the pawn. Get queen a8. Okay, now I'm going to go knight to e5, attacking the rook. There are some serious threats now on these diagonals towards this black king. I think I might already be close to winning, in fact. Black still cannot castle because the queen covers the square. You can't castle through a check. So we get rook a6. Now I should be winning here because I have check, hitting the king, you can't castle, and I have this queen d7 move to threaten an immediate checkmate. Very close to losing already for my opponent. In fact, I almost can pre-move queen d7. I probably shouldn't, but I can if I want to. I think I'll just go queen d7. Okay, so now I threaten the checkmate right away. The f7 pawn is under attack, so if black takes, it's game over. Bishop g6, excellent move for my opponent. Okay, now I'm going to try to get tricky here. I'm going to play this move f3. So my opponent takes the bishop. Now I take the knight, and suddenly you'll notice there's massive pressure again on this f file. This is simply checkmate. I take, followed by queen f7. There's no way to stop checkmate. That's the end of the game. So a couple important points from this game that I want to mention. Now the first important point here is that it's funny. My opponent played bishop f5. Now I could have played a couple moves here. I could have played c3 to stop knight b4. I also could have gone c4. c4 would be a move that I would say if you're intermediate or master level, it's worth studying this position and thinking about c4. If you're a beginner, don't worry about it. Either go c3 or do what I did with knight to f3. c3 maybe is a little bit easier because it stops knight before, so there are no cheeses. But after e6, knight f3, let's say black, or not knight f3, it's e6. Here, probably what I recommended, since you can't play bishop d3, I'd immediately try to go for an attack on the queen side here with queen b3. You could also play something like knight f3, bishop g3, knight d2, let's say h6, of course, so black can retreat the bishop. Then again, maybe queen b3, maybe bishop b5. Also bishop e2 is fine, but probably I think when your opponent brings a bishop out, the three things you're looking for potentially, if you're a stronger player, you want to look if you can go c2 to c4 in one go. If you're more beginner, lower intermediate level, you want to look for ideas like bishop b5 to pin the knights, or queen b3 to pressure the pawn. Generally, these two ideas are what I would be thinking about if I'm newer to the game, when your opponent puts a bishop on f5 very early to stop you from putting the bishop on this very critical d3 square. All right, so back to the game. We got knight b4. I go knight a3 here to guard the pawn, and now after c3 we get this. And it's very funny because back here, if we could somehow get this position with knight b8 and knight b5, my opponent could go knight to a6 followed by this move c6 to kick the knight back. But because my opponent goes back to c6. Now there's no good way to guard this pawn. You can't put a knight here to magically guard the pawn. If you go rook to c8 here, there's already queen to a4 attacking this pawn. After a6, knight a7, suddenly this pin is a huge issue, and black is actually completely lost already in this situation. So we get bishop b6 takes, queen b3, pressure on both pawns. Of course, we get rook b8, now queen to a3, putting more pressure. We get the move knight f6, and here I play the move bishop takes d6. Now I think if I were playing against someone a little bit stronger, I probably would actually go queen d6 here based on what happened in the game, because when I take with the bishop, black is unable to castle the king, but I also don't have a quick way to open up the position. So even though I'm way ahead in development objectively, where I can move the bishop and castle, and black's king is almost never going to be able to castle, with no open files, it's actually a little bit hard to prove the advantage. So I go here, we get knight e4, great move, a6, I take, and now I've decided to castle here, and we got the move a5. Now my opponent actually should have played the move f6 to cut off this e5 square, and here white is better because you can start trying to open up the c file with the extra pawn, but black is by no means completely lost. Instead we get a5, I take, I go here, we get this, check, queen d7, and now I get tricky with f3, we get takes, f takes e4, and just like that the f file completely opens. Black could still maybe go f6 here, but I think after queen d6 there's going to be a checkmate here with knight d7, simply checkmating the king. So it's really, there's not a whole lot black can do. We get this, takes, and then checkmate. If black moves the king, same thing. It's simply checkmate here with the queen and the rook. So we got a nice win in the third game. That's 3 games that we played today in the London system. 2 is white, 1 is black. So this video is definitely all about the London system. Of course, there's a lot of stuff we didn't get into because these games are short. They didn't feature some of the absolute main lines, but nonetheless, I hope you guys did enjoy the London system video, which is part of our educational speedrun series. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry about the slight production issue with the cutoff of the board the first game, although luckily it was only on the edges, so I think you guys still could see all the action. But I hope you guys enjoyed it nonetheless, and we'll be back very soon with another video in this educational speedrun series. See you guys, have a good one, bye.